Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in the studio with me, Shane Bauer, Sarah Short, and Josh Fatal. They are the collective authors of a new book called A Sliver of Light, Three Americans Imprisoned in Iran. And they are the, if you remember back in 2009, the three hikers who got nailed on the Iranian border. Actually, a guard said, "Come over here," and you didn't realize you were, Josh, stepping over the border.
No, we didn't realize.
Or stepping off the border or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we were unfortunately walking along the border. Guard waved us to come, and we, at that point, crossed the border.
Yeah.
And then from that point, it was downhill from there. We went down the hill into Iran. They took us down into SUV, right. The police at the police station, immediately somebody sees that we're American and says, "You're American. You know, the Americans just took people, Iranians, prisoners for 2 years." 2 years. And I thought, well, that's between these governments. That shouldn't have anything to do with me. But, of course, that was just the first few hours of 781 days.
Wow. Yeah. And a lot of it, at least for Sarah in particular, in solitary confinement, all you guys were also held under those conditions. And first of all, let me introduce Shane and Bauer and Sarah Short. And hi to you guys. I got to look around the camera here to see Sarah. And they're sitting in our studio over by Shano, our board op and associate producer. Sarah, first of all, if I could start with you, you speak compellingly about the impact of solitary confinement, and you experienced a lot of this. Talk to that, if you could, please.
Well, prolonged time in isolation really slows down the human brain. After 2 to 3 days, studies have shown that the brainwaves will shift towards stupor or delirium. And I spent 410 days in solitary confinement. The UN says 15 days can cause permanent lasting damage and constitute torture. You get reduced to an animal-like state, pacing your cell compulsively, obsessively. People that I've known in this country that have been in solitary for years or decades will actually wear a path into the concrete floor of their cells from pacing. You're filled with anxiety. It's hard to sleep. At the worst moments, I completely lost awareness of myself and screamed and beat at the walls of my cell.
Yeah, in one case, without even realizing you were doing it.
I thought the scream was coming from far away, another corridor, and I just wanted it to stop because I couldn't do anything to help that person. I just wanted it to go away. And then the guards burst into my cell and started shaking me, and I realized I'd been screaming.
How does that affect you now?
I'm doing well now. I've had incredible support from family and friends. Shane and I have really helped each other through this. A lot of people don't have that support when they get out. Many people are released in this country directly from years in isolation onto the streets with no networks, and it's not surprising that they often go back to crime and end up back in prison, or they end up homeless in the street. These days I don't have many lasting symptoms, but it took years.
Yeah. Shane, the three of you, Shane Bauer now, the three of you have become pretty outspoken advocates for ending the use of solitary confinement as a punishment tool in United States prisons. Tell me about that.
And in my work as a journalist, I've kind of, after I got out of prison, I went from my focus in the Middle East to kind of looking in prisons in the U.S. I heard about a big hunger strike that was happening in California. It was involving thousands of inmates that were protesting long-term solitary confinement. And I found that there were people in California that had been in solitary for 20, 30, 40 years. Some of them, you know, who were there because they were named kind of gang members or gang affiliates. And when I dug into their cases, I found people that, you know, were called gang affiliates because they had books, academic books by the Black Panthers, Machiavelli's Art of War, or they had, you know, spoken to a gang member at some point, and they would get put in solitary in cells that I visited that were 7 feet by 11 feet, had no windows, and it was really hard for them to get out. You know, once they got in, it was hard to get out. And we're talking about 80,000 people in the country that are in solitary confinement, more than any other country in the world.
Josh, are the solitary conditions in the United States worse than they were in Iran?
You know, it's hard for me to compare. I've not been in the solitary cells in the U.S., but I do know the UN considers 15 days in solitary to be torture. And the idea of being left alone in a cell with no one to talk to, one of the things I realized and told myself again and again in prison was people are people through other people.
Right.
And that's something that Nelson Mandela has said and he writes about. And it's
We
really
are
true.
social animals.
We're social animals. And when you have no one to talk to, you lose sense of who you are. Right. And so whether you're locked in a 10 by 14 cell in Iran or a different cell in the U.S., it's solitary confinement.
Right. Or an animal in a zoo, for that matter. I mean, you see these animals in zoos who behave so
frantically.
Yeah, not normally.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing, Sarah? What are you doing to try to stop, and what success are you having to bring awareness to and try to stop the use of solitary confinement in the United States?
I'm a contributing editor at Solitary Watch. You can find us solitarywatch.com. And over the last 6 or 8 months, I've been collecting written and oral testimonies from people around this country in prolonged solitary confinement through in-depth letter correspondences, prison visits, and in-person interviews for those that are on the outside. And we'll be compiling these into an anthology, writing by people in solitary, and I'm also writing a play called Opening the Box. So really trying to bring America's attention to the fact that this practice destroys people. It breaks them. A lot of people that go into the prison system have already had really difficult lives. They've made mistakes, but that doesn't mean that they deserve to be tortured or that it's legal to torture them.
Right.
And we don't want them to come out worse than they went in.
Shane, how are you dealing with the consequences of your imprisonment? And what are if you could speak to what Sarah was just speaking to, what you're doing?
It's changed over time. It's been about 2.5 years now, and I feel, like I've kind of back to normal, but it was a long process. There was times when I first got out, there was this moment of just incredible joy of being free, and we swam in the ocean in Oman and reconnected with our families and Sarah. And then in the following days, I felt like I was kind of, my mind was in a cloud in some ways. I had a hard time reading people's body language other than Josh's. I could read every line of Josh's face and, every detail. But other people, I had to say to them that I need you to tell me exactly what you mean because I can't, understand the subtleties. I've kind of lost that function to a degree. And it was also really hard for me to make choices, which is really common for prisoners getting out because, you don't really get to make choices in prison. So you lose that function of your brain. And for the long period after that, I carried around kind of a tension that, I now understand as post-traumatic stress. I would just be really on edge a lot and have a hard time being in crowds, sometimes have a hard time being alone, and, just had to kind of white knuckle it sometimes. I, would sometimes just feel like I wanted to explode. And I think, it took time for that to kind of pass and to readjust to being back in the world with people. It takes time to kind of shift out of prison mentality.
Right. Josh Fatal, your thoughts on this and what we can do. I think we have about a minute left.
Yeah. A lot of my work now, I'm studying history, and I feel like I was caught up in this battle that has decades-old roots, and it's a historical problem between U.S. and Iran. Until we can come to terms with this history of aggression in of U.S. foreign policy, we're going to still find people in situations like that where I lost 2 years of my life.
Wow. Not to mention our domestic policy, the insanity of having more prisoners than any other country in the world.
Exactly.
Josh, Shane, Sarah, thank you. Great to have you all with us. The book is, hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The book is A Sliver of Light, 3 Americans Imprisoned in Iran.